Can a truth come from a lie? So this came about as I was thinking about the relationship between the imagination and the memory. And the more I thought about it, I realized it's actually pretty hard to distinguish this. And so it's like, okay, well, what does that mean for you? What that means is that when we think about what we want out of life, when we think about what's possible for us, are we actually genuinely tapping into our potential, or are we being caged by the memory of what we think we can have, confusing it with what we think we want, right? And so this came about as I was contemplating the idea of truth, right? And so let's take this back and go to well before anything was ever known, right? We have, I'm gonna get colorful here. I don't have any yellow, but I have all these markers. I came here to draw things with them. Yet I've been here rushing through these as if we're not here to enjoy the show. All right. This water right here. Then we gotta get some earth on there. I don't know, we'll do earth. We'll do some purple for earth, right? And the riverbank right there. And so in this situation we have people. All right, let's say we're talking about early humanity, right? And so the question is, let's assume language existed, right? So we could say things to each other. We understood that cat is an abstraction of a cat and all that stuff. And so they're talking and they're going, yo, 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 right? And this other person going, yo, 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 yo. The question is, what are they doing here, right? They're doing something called communicating, right? It's going to be really true. It's really key for truth because many things we think are true right now came to us via communication. And we're going to go, what is communication exactly? Communication is the transmission of consciousness. Don't worry. We're going to simplify it even more. What is consciousness? Nothing crazy. Consciousness is your personal point of view. Your personal point of view. That's it. So you could break it down even more. Consciousness. Oops. There. Consciousness is your awareness of existence. Right, we got two different layers here. So communication is a transmission of consciousness. And if consciousness is awareness of existence, then when we communicate to each other, we're transmitting our point of view on existence. That's it. And so if we feel like, oh, I'm a bad communicator, what you're saying is you're not very good at transmitting your experience of existence to other people in a way that they can understand. But that's not always true. And this is where it gets interesting because it turns out communication has various forms. Now, we're used to what's thought of as language, but we have to think about it. What is language, right? And how does this relate to truth? Language is transmission. That's it. And so when we think of it like that, we often think language is words. But language aren't words. Language are transmissions. Language, the transmission of a message. That's why we can have Spanish, transmission of a message. English, transmission of a message. German, transmission of a message. And I can be speaking to a German, somebody who speaks German but doesn't understand English, and I don't understand German. And we're talking about the same thing, but we don't know we're doing it. Why? Because they're transmitting the message, I'm transmitting the message, but there's no way for us to understand what each other is saying. And so language is not just words and whatnot. It's the process of somebody sending somebody a message, them understanding the message that they sent them sending back a message, the other person understanding it, the transmission, which means that language, words are only one form because they're only one way to send a message. But then I could send you a message in images. And I could send you a message through action, right? That's what sign language is. Action. Doing action. But the question is, how do I know that the other person is understanding what I'm saying? How do I know that the other person is actually receiving what I'm saying? So let's come back to the earth part right here, right? This is really key. How do I know the other person is understanding what I'm saying? So I'll clean this up. Because truth, right? We think of what truth is. Truth is just what existence is, point blank, period. You can't change it. You can't argue it. It just is, right? But then that question, how do I know that the other person understands what I'm saying? So let's say I say to somebody, and I'm sure you've experienced this. You say to somebody, hey, grandma said this, this, and that, right? If you play the game of telephone. So he's going, grandma said da 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 da, right? And then he goes, communicates with somebody else. So now what he said was, let's say, grandma said, hey, that's the message. As this guy is saying it, he's like, okay, clearly he transmitted it. And so this guy receives it and goes, got it. So he goes down here and he says, I was just talking to Vidal and he told me that grandma said, yo. Right. And he goes, oh, darn. And you can see where this is going. Now it got changed to grandpa said, yo. And now I got, what happened here? Was this person lying? And was what this person got a lie? Was it a lie or was it not? And so now we run into an interesting dilemma, because if we're talking about early humanity, then the only way to really know if this person is the source of truth, right? Because we could argue, is that what grandma even said, right? Or is that what he heard? Is that what grandma said, or is that what he heard? Which one is true? What she said or what she said or what he heard, right? And so we have to ask ourselves the question, well, that's not what she said originally, so what got down here wasn't the truth. Well, how could that happen? It happened because truth is stored as memory. But that's odd. But if truth is stored as memory, and he told grandma that that was true, then how come by the time it got to whoever this guy is at the bottom, the complete message changed? That's because memory has an interesting quality to it, it seems. For some reason, we can misremember. Isn't that odd? Or consider that. Misremember. Something can happen, but then what we remember is different than what happened. Well, that would mean that memory is not, you could say, an exact copy of the experience. It's not exact. So if it's not exact, this is the big question. Where did the stuff that didn't happen come from? So if, let's say grandma said, hey, and he says grandma said, yo, where did that yo come from? If it wasn't said to him, where did it come from? It came from this person's imagination. And so now we notice something that, that's interesting. His imagination changed the message. But then we have imagination and memory interacting with each other. And we go, hold on. What is the relationship between these two? If the message keeps changing, by the time it gets to this person 50 years later, what message are they getting? Are they getting the imaginary message or the true memory? And this was interesting for me to consider, because what it brings up is, well, what is truth when we think about history, right? And when we think about history, the concept of history means his story, right? History would start with this guy right here. Grandma said, but that's his story. And then his story, and then his story, and then his story, and then his story, and his story, and his story. And then we get to the modern times, and we hear these ancient stories, and we go, that was true. Yet, if we play a simple game of telephone just within that circle, by the time we go through 10 people, by the time it gets back to the other person, the message is different. So what does that look like over hundreds of years? And this brings an interesting question. Is what we think currently of history, of even our family lineage, true? Is it a memory or is it an imagination? Is it memory or imagination? How much of this message got edited by the time it got to us? And so it brings up a thought where we go, now that I think about it, unless I experience something directly, then I really don't know if that was the original truth. If I don't experience something directly, I don't know if that's the original truth. So that brings this issue of, well, how do I know that something is true if I've never directly experienced it? You can't. The only way is through secondhand knowledge, which is trusting the memory of somebody else, right? And we already saw how that went. So you have to trust not only that this person remembered it and grandma actually said that, but you have to trust that what he's telling you isn't a modification. So you think you're getting what grandma said, you're getting what he heard grandma say. You're hearing what he heard grandma say. And so as information propagates or is going down throughout history, oftentimes the only thing that's remembered is the skeleton of it, not the details. Why is the skeleton so important? Because the skeletons are the only things that survive death. The principle is the only thing that survives death. Why? Because the principle is the only thing that doesn't change, no matter who you tell it to. It allows somebody to directly experience something in the exact same way you did. They can just go, oh, well, I don't know if that's true. And you go, okay, apply it. And the person applies it and like, oh my goodness, I got the same outcome. I got the same outcome as the person who told me about it. I followed their unique recipe and realized the recipe never belonged to them. The recipe was natural. It was a natural principle. It was a natural law. And so truth cannot come from a lie. Why? Because truth only exists in nature. Truth only exists in nature. How is that? Well, truth only exists in nature. Yes, because everything, every human invention, everything was the mixture of nature and mind. But it wasn't just any old mixture. The invention, the creation had to submit to the laws of nature first. The laws of nature does not negotiate with us. We must submit. We must align ourselves, right? We don't just get to decide, oh, I've decided fire shouldn't burn me. Fire shouldn't be hot. Water shouldn't flow. Air shouldn't blow, right? We don't get to decide that. But what we do is learn, oh, if I understand the nature of this thing, I can receive the benefits and influence it to benefit my own life. And that's where truth truly lives, in the principle layer. We talked about this before, but we'll go over it again here. The difference between a principle and a pathway. A principle never changes. Pathway always changes. And so truth is here. And we have here called perspective. Truth and perspective. The truth is in the center, and the perspectives change. And so coming back to the original question, can truth come from a lie? Well, memory is actually what happened. Truth, principle. The pathway or the perspective is what was relevant to us from that event. What was relevant to us from that event? So grandma said, hey, that was what was relevant. Grandma may have said, hey, grandson, I love you. And I, tell everybody I love. Grandma said, hey. And so the question then becomes, well, what throughout history was not remembered because it wasn't relevant for the people at the time? And so you got the skeleton and not the flesh. And that's the journey we're all on, right? That's the journey we're all on. Whether that looks like you figuring out what purpose looks like for you as a human being, whether that looks like what's your relationship with spirituality or the Almighty, God, religion, whatever that may be in your relationship with your identity, with your family, all these things, and much of who you've come to know yourself as were the products of memories, other people's pathways that was shared with you, and some principle. And our journey throughout life is to find the principle, find the truth. And then from that unique coming back to the truth, we use our memory to go, that was my pathway to the truth. That was my unique pathway to the truth. But never confuse the two. And this can help us understand why there's so much contention currently. Because this person and this person are looking at the same thing from different angles. But this person thinks they're talking about the principle, but they're talking about their perspective of the principle. And this person thinks they're talking about the principle, but they're talking about their perspective of the principle. And we get this fighting. Not understanding that what we're fighting fighting about is the pathway to the truth, not the truth. Because the truth does not require belief. The truth does not require belief. It does not debate. It does not argue. The sun does not care how many people say, I don't believe in the sun. Truth does not require belief. And so a lie cannot come from the truth. And if a lie can't come from the truth, then you can never be deceived as long as you continue questioning. Because questioning is the only true way to find your way back out of the shadows, out of the confusion, out of other people's memories, his story, so you can find out who you actually are. That's how we can actually find out the truth. And so for myself, I've always been on a journey to shed other people's pathways and find out what the actual principles are in life, right? First principles, as they're often called. And I've come to listen to different conversations, listen to different arguments, and all I always think is, this person is speaking from secondhand knowledge, not firsthand experience. But secondhand knowledge is always based on trust. It's always based on trust because you can never truly know. And so the only true pathway to truth is firsthand experience. And everything else is trust. Everything else is trust. And once that lands, then ideally a sense of liberation will emerge. Because now, what this person says I must do is their secondhand experience attempted to be projected upon my life. And that's impossible. Why? Because as we said, consciousness is a being's unique perspective on existence. And so nobody can ever tell somebody else what their consciousness needs. Because no two consciousnesses can hold the same perspective. No two beings can hold the same time space at the same time. No two beings can occupy the same time space. So that means no two beings can perfectly see the world the exact same way. Which means no two beings can have the exact same pathway back to the truth. But don't confuse the pathway with the principle. So hopefully this was more of just a random thing that I was thinking on that I wanted to share. Hopefully it helped somebody out there, one viewer. And if it was useful, then I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. Or if you have any questions. So until next time, take care.